Mafia boss secretly followed his maid. During her errand, what he discovered left him speechless. The dim evening light cast long shadows across Alexio Vetro's mansion as he stood in the darkened hallway, his presence hidden behind heavy velvet curtains. His dark eyes tracked Isabella's movements with predatory focus, watching as she moved through her cleaning routine with practiced grace. There was something different about her, something that set her apart from the other staff. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself, head held high despite her position, or how she seemed immune to the fear that usually radiated from those in his presence. Whatever it was, it gnawed at him, demanding his attention. Isabella adjusted her simple black uniform, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear as she folded fresh linens with careful precision. Her movements were efficient, yet there was an underlying tension in her shoulders that spoke of hidden burdens. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Alexio's fingers tightened around the crystal tumbler in his hand, ice clinking softly against the glass. 6 months she'd worked in his home, and still, she remained an enigma. Other maids gossiped, flirted, or cowered. Isabella did none of these things. She arrived exactly on time each morning, performed her duties without complaint, and left each evening like clockwork. But lately, something had changed. Small details that most would miss, but not him. Never him. The slight bulge of her bag when she left, though it was flat upon arrival. The way her eyes darted to the clock more frequently as evening approached. The subtle shift in her demeanor as departure time neared. He took a slow sip of whiskey, savoring the burn as he watched her move to the next task. In his world, secrets were dangerous things. They were weapons to be wielded or wounds to be exploited. And Isabella Romano had secrets. He was sure of it now. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 8, its deep chimes echoing through the mansion. Right on schedule, Isabella gathered her things, methodically checking her cart before heading to the staff room. Alexio moved silently through the shadows, following at a distance as she collected her personal belongings. There it was. The careful way she handled her bag, now noticeably fuller than it had been that morning. His jaw clenched. Was she stealing from him? The thought sent a wave of fury through his body, hot and violent. But no, this was different. There was something calculated about her movements, a purpose that spoke of regularity rather than opportunity. He watched as she pulled on her worn coat, the material thin against the evening chill. Other staff members called out quiet goodnights, which she returned with small smiles that never quite reached her eyes. She moved through the halls like a ghost, present but somehow separate from the world around her. As Isabella approached the service entrance, Alexio slipped into his office, pressing a button to activate the security cameras. He tracked her progress across the grounds, noting how she kept to the shadows, how her pace quickened once she passed through the gates. Making a decision, he set down his glass and grabbed his leather jacket. With swift, silent movements, he made his way to the garage, selecting the most understated of his vehicles, a black BMW with tinted windows. By the time he pulled onto the street, Isabella was just visible in the distance, her figure illuminated by the harsh glow of street lamps. The city darkness swallowed them both as he maintained a careful distance, his hand steady on the wheel despite the anger simmering beneath his skin. She led him away from the wealthy district, past the commercial center, into neighborhoods that grew progressively more run down. Each turn took them deeper into territory that someone of her position should have no business visiting at this hour. His pulse quickened, though his expression remained impassive. Whatever game Isabella was playing, whatever secrets she was hiding, he would discover them tonight. No one kept secrets from Alexio Vetro. Not in his house, not in his city. The streets narrowed, buildings pressed closer, their facades crumbling under years of neglect. Isabella's pace never faltered, her steps sure despite the growing shadows. In her arms, the bags she carried seemed to weigh heavier with each block they traversed. The BMW's engine purred quietly as Alexio tracked Isabella's path through the maze of narrow streets. His knuckles whitened against the leather steering wheel as she ventured deeper into one of the city's most dangerous districts. Few street lamps worked here, casting long shadows between brief pools of sickly yellow light. Isabella moved with purpose, her steps quick but steady. She showed no fear walking these dangerous streets alone, something that both impressed and infuriated him. The bags in her arms swayed with each step, their contents still a mystery that made his blood simmer. He killed the engine and watched as she approached a weathered apartment building. Paint peeled from its facade like dying skin, and several windows were boarded up. The kind of place his associates used for drop-offs and worse. The sight of her entering such a location made his jaw clench. "What game are you playing, little thief?" he muttered, sliding out of his car. The night air carried the stench of garbage and desperation, smells that had no place near someone who worked in his home. Moving like a shadow, Alexio crossed the street. Years of experience made his footsteps silent despite his size. He positioned himself in a darkened doorway across from the building's entrance, his dark clothing blending perfectly with the shadows. From here, he could see the warm glow of lights through a ground-floor window. Minutes ticked by. Each passing moment fed his growing rage. His mind conjured scenarios. Was she selling information about his operation? Meeting with rivals? The possibilities made his trigger finger itch. In his world, betrayal had only one consequence. A shape moved behind the dirty window, then another. Alexio's hand instinctively moved to the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. The door creaked open, spilling weak light onto the cracked sidewalk. Isabella emerged, but she wasn't alone. An elderly woman shuffled beside her, one hand gripping Isabella's arm for support. Her gray hair was tied back in a neat but simple bun, her clothes clean but well-worn. She moved slowly, each step careful and measured, while Isabella supported her with gentle patience. Alexio's anger faltered, replaced by confusion as he watched the scene unfold. The two women stopped under one of the working street lamps. Isabella set down her bags and began removing items. Groceries, he realized. Fresh fruit, bread, what looked like medicine bottles. The older woman's hands trembled as she tried to press something into Isabella's palm. "Money," Alexio noted, though Isabella seemed reluctant to take it. Their voices carried faintly across the street, too low to make out the words, but their tone was intimate, familiar. This was no clandestine meeting between conspirators. The tenderness in Isabella's movements, the way she adjusted the elderly woman's shawl, spoke of something deeper. Yet questions still burned in Alexio's mind. Why the secrecy? Why risk these dangerous streets at night? Who was this woman to his mysterious maid? The exchange continued, Isabella finally accepting what appeared to be a small sum, while giving the woman far more in return. There was something in her posture that Alexio had never seen before. A softness, a vulnerability that she never showed at the mansion. It made her look younger, more fragile, and stirred something unexpected in his chest. From his vantage point, he could see tears glistening in the old woman's eyes as she cupped Isabella's cheek. The gesture was maternal, loving. Isabella leaned into the touch for a moment before carefully guiding the woman back towards the building's entrance. Alexio remained motionless in his hiding spot, watching as Isabella ensured the woman was safely inside. When she turned back to the street, her mask of quiet efficiency had returned. But now he knew it for what it was. A shield, hiding whatever connection bound her to this place, to that woman. The elderly woman's silhouette disappeared behind the weathered door, leaving Isabella alone on the dimly lit street. Alexio watched as she took a deep breath, her shoulders squaring as if preparing for another battle. The transformation fascinated him. How quickly she shifted from gentle caregiver to the guarded woman he knew from his mansion. Isabella checked her watch, her movements becoming more urgent. She still carried one bag, smaller than the others, but held close to her chest like something precious. The night air had grown colder, and she pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself as she started walking again. Alexio followed, maintaining his distance. The practiced ease of surveillance came naturally to him, his footsteps silent on the cracked pavement. They moved through streets that grew gradually less decrepit, though still far from the luxury of his territory. Here, small businesses struggled to survive, their signs faded but their windows clean, the mark of people fighting to maintain dignity in poverty. Under the glow of a functioning street lamp, Isabella paused to check an address on her phone. The light caught her face, and Alexio saw what he'd missed before. Beneath her composed expression lay exhaustion, worry lines etched around her eyes. But there was something else too. Determination, and what looked unmistakably like love. The same expression she'd worn while helping the elderly woman. The sight stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. He was used to reading people, to seeing through their lies and manipulations. But Isabella's face held no deception, only raw emotion that made him feel like an intruder for witnessing it. She turned down another street, her pace quickening. Alexio recognized the area now, a neighborhood known for its medical facilities and charitable organizations. The buildings here were newer, their purposes announced by professionally maintained signs. Isabella approached one of them, a modest structure with warm light spilling from its windows despite the late hour. The sign above the door read, Hope Harbor Cancer Support Center. Through the glass, Alexio could see a small reception area where a tired-looking woman sat behind a desk. Isabella entered, triggering a gentle chime. Alexio moved closer, positioning himself where he could observe through the window without being seen. The reception area was decorated with positive messages and information pamphlets about various cancer treatments. Isabella approached the desk, speaking softly to the receptionist, who greeted her with familiar warmth. From his angle, Alexio could see Isabella removing something from her bag, an envelope, thick with cash. His first instinct was to confirm his suspicions of theft, but as he watched, that certainty crumbled. Isabella handed over the envelope with reverence, her hands trembling slightly. The receptionist counted the money efficiently, then wrote out what appeared to be a receipt. Their conversation continued, the receptionist's expression compassionate as she made notes in a computer. Isabella's posture remained tense until the woman handed her a printed document, at which point her shoulders finally relaxed. She clutched the paper like a lifeline. Alexio's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. The elderly woman, the medical facility, the careful saving of money. Isabella wasn't stealing from him. She was working multiple jobs, pinching every penny to fund someone's cancer, treatment. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. The woman he'd suspected of betrayal was instead sacrificing everything to save someone else's life. His assumptions about her character crumbled, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of his own rushed judgment. In his world of power plays and betrayals, such selfless devotion was foreign, almost incomprehensible. Through the window, he watched Isabella thank the receptionist one final time. Her face showed relief mixed with lingering worry, the look of someone who had won one battle but knew many more lay ahead. She had managed to make another payment, but at what personal cost? The realization left him stunned, rooted to his hiding spot, as Isabella gathered her now empty bag. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable, yet paradoxically stronger than he'd ever seen her. This quiet strength, this secret battle she fought every day, had been happening right under his nose, and he'd completely misunderstood it. The alley's darkness wrapped around Alexio like a familiar cloak as he waited, his broad shoulders pressed against the cold brick wall. Every muscle in his body was tense, coiled with a mixture of fury and confusion that threatened to explode. The gentle drizzle that had started falling did nothing to cool his temper. His mind kept replaying the scenes he'd witnessed. Isabella's careful movements, her gentle interaction with the elderly woman, the envelope full of cash at the cancer center. None of it aligned with what he'd expected to discover. The truth was far more complex, and that complexity only fueled his anger. He didn't like feeling wrong, and he liked being deceived even less. The sound of approaching footsteps drew his attention. Isabella's silhouette appeared at the entrance of the alley, her shoulders slightly hunched against the rain. She walked with purpose, completely unaware of his presence in the shadows. The sight of her ignorance sparked something dangerous in him. Alexio stepped out of the darkness, his movement deliberate and predatory. Isabella froze mid-step, her eyes widening as she recognized him. The small gasp that escaped her lips echoed in the narrow space between them. Going somewhere? His voice was deceptively soft, but the underlying steel was unmistakable. Isabella took an instinctive step backward, her back hitting the rough brick wall. "Mr. Vetro," she managed, her voice steady despite the fear he could see flickering in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" "I think the better question is, what are you doing here?" He moved closer, effectively boxing her in. "Sneaking around in the dark, carrying bags of money, meeting with strangers. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Color drained from Isabella's face, but her chin lifted defiantly. "I don't owe you any explanations about my personal life. Everything about your life belongs to me." His hand slammed against the wall beside her head, making her flinch. "You work in my house. You live under my protection. And you've been hiding things from me." "I haven't stolen anything," Isabella said, her voice tight with emotion. "I've never taken what wasn't mine." "No?" Alexio leaned closer, his breath fanning across her face. "Then explain the money. Explain the secret meetings. Explain why one of my maids is wandering through the worst parts of the city in the middle of the night." Isabella's eyes flashed with anger, replacing her fear. "I told you, I have nothing to explain to you. What I do with my wages is my business." "Everything is my business." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Everyone who works for me knows that. There are no secrets in my world, Isabella." She squared her shoulders, meeting his intense gaze. "Then fire me. If you don't trust me, let me go." The suggestion made his blood boil. The thought of her walking away, disappearing from his carefully controlled world, was unacceptable. "Let you go?" He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You don't understand, do you? You're already too deep in this world, in my world." Isabella tried to step around him, her movements quick but not quick enough. "I'm leaving." His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her arm with bruising force. He pulled her back, bringing her body flush against his. The contact sent electricity through him, feeding the darkness that always lurked beneath his controlled exterior. "You're mine now," he growled, his lips nearly touching her ear. "And you'll never escape." Isabella went rigid in his grip, a small tremor running through her body at his words. The force of his declaration hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat. The rain intensified, droplets sliding down Isabella's face like tears she refused to shed. Alexio's fingers dug into her arm, each point of contact burning through the thin fabric of her sleeve. His presence overwhelmed her senses, the crisp scent of his cologne mixing with leather and something darker, more dangerous. "Let go of me," she whispered, hating how her voice trembled. Her free hand pressed against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath expensive silk. Alexio's grip only tightened. "You've been lying to me, Isabella." His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the rage simmering beneath. "Every night, sneaking around like a thief." "I haven't stolen anything." The words burst from her with unexpected force. "Everything I have, I earned. Every dollar, every cent. And yet you hide." His other hand came up to grip her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. In the dim light of the alley, his eyes were almost black. "Why? What else are you hiding from me?" Isabella's throat tightened. She couldn't tell him about her mother, about the treatments that drained every penny she earned. He would use that weakness against her. Men like him always did. "My life outside these walls is none of your concern," she managed, trying to twist away from his grip. His laugh was cold, empty. "Everything about you concerns me." His thumb traced her jawline, the gentle touch at odds with his bruising grip on her arm. "From the moment you stepped into my house, you became mine." The possessive edge in his voice sent shivers down her spine. Fear, she told herself. It had to be fear, not the electric thrill that made her pulse race, not the heat that bloomed in her chest despite the cold rain. "I'm your employee," she corrected, forcing steel into her voice. "Nothing more." "Is that what you think?" He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "That you can simply clock in and out of my world? That you can keep your secrets, your little double life?" Isabella closed her eyes, trying to center herself. The wall behind her was solid, unyielding, like the man before her. "What do you want from me?" "Everything." The word was a growl that vibrated through her body. "Your loyalty, your honesty, your submission. No more secrets, no more lies. And if I refuse?" The question was barely audible over the rain. His grip softened slightly, but the danger in his touch remained. "You won't." His certainty terrified her. "You can't." And deep down, Isabella knew he was right. She was trapped, not by his physical strength, but by circumstance. Her mother needed those treatments. She needed this job, needed the stability it provided. She'd walked into this gilded cage willingly, and now the door was slamming shut. Alexio must have felt her resignation. His hold on her arm loosened, though he didn't step back. "Good girl," he murmured, the praise sending an unwanted spark of warmth through her chest. "You're learning." When he finally released her, Isabella felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. The rain had soaked through her clothes, but she barely noticed the cold. Her skin tingled where he had touched her, phantom pressure that refused to fade. She took one step away from him, then another. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to keep moving. The weight of his gaze followed her, heavy and possessive. Each step felt like fighting against an invisible chain, one that bound her to him more surely than any physical restraint. Isabella didn't look back as she walked away, but she didn't need to. She could feel him watching, his presence burning into her like a brand. The truth settled over her like the rain. She might have resisted him before, but now she was tethered to him, caught in a web of her own making. Morning light filtered through the mansion's tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Alexio stood in his study, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold on his desk. His attention was fixed on the security feed displayed on his tablet, specifically on Isabella, who moved through the East Wing with practiced efficiency. She looked tired. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of their confrontation the previous night. Her movements were slower than usual, but no less precise. Even exhausted, she maintained that quiet grace that had first caught his attention. Alexio's fingers tightened around the tablet. Last night had changed everything. The mystery that surrounded her had only deepened, and with it, his obsession. She wasn't just another employee. She was a puzzle he needed to solve, a treasure he needed to possess. He watched as she paused to adjust a painting in the hallway, her slender fingers straightening the frame with careful attention. Such dedication to detail, even in the smallest tasks. It was maddening how she could appear so innocent while harboring such secrets. Standing abruptly, Alexio left his study. He needed to see her up close, to observe every minute reaction, every subtle shift in her expression. The sound of his Italian leather shoes echoed through the corridors as he sought her out. He found her in the library, dusting the shelves of first editions. She tensed at his approach, a slight straightening of her spine, a barely perceptible catch in her breathing. She knew it was him without turning around. The awareness between them crackled like electricity. "Good morning, Mr. Vetro," she said softly, her voice carefully neutral. She continued her work, refusing to face him directly. Alexio moved closer, close enough to catch the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair. "Isabella." He let her name roll off his tongue slowly, savoring each syllable. "You seem tired this morning." Her hand stilled for a moment before resuming their task. "I'm fine, sir. Thank you for your concern." "Are you?" He reached past her to grab a book, his chest barely brushing her back. She went completely still, like a deer sensing a predator. "Because after last night, I would think you'd have trouble sleeping. I know I did." Isabella's fingers tightened on the feather duster. "I have work to do, Mr. Vetro." "Look at me." It wasn't a request. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned. Their bodies were inches apart, trapped between the bookshelf and his imposing frame. Her eyes met his, defiant despite her obvious discomfort. Alexio studied her face, taking in every detail. The slight flush in her cheeks, the way her lips parted slightly with each careful breath, the flutter of her pulse visible at her throat. She was beautiful in her fear, but it was her strength that captivated him. The way she held his gaze despite everything. "Your dedication to your work is admirable," he said, reaching up to brush an imaginary speck of dust from her shoulder. She flinched slightly at his touch, but didn't step back. "But I wonder what drives such devotion. What makes you push yourself so hard, work such long hours?" "I take pride in my work," she answered, but they both knew it was only part of the truth. His hand moved to her chin, tilting her face up slightly. "Pride doesn't explain the money you've been giving away. Pride doesn't explain the secrets." Isabella's breath hitched, but she remained silent. The sunlight, streaming through the library windows, caught the gold flecks in her eyes, making them shine with an inner fire that matched her spirit. Alexio felt something shift inside him, a deepening of his fascination, a strengthening of his resolve to possess not just her body, but every secret she held. He wanted to break through her carefully constructed walls, to own every part of her. She must have seen something change in his expression because fear flickered across her features. But beneath the fear, he caught a glimpse of something else, a flash of heat, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. She wasn't immune to him, despite her protests. Isabella worked steadily through her morning tasks, but she couldn't escape the weight of his attention. Every room she entered, every chore she performed, she felt his eyes following her. It was unnerving how his mere presence could affect her so deeply, how her body seemed to hum with awareness whenever he was near. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she carried the first course into the dining room. The weight of the silver platters wasn't what made her nervous. It was the 6 pairs of eyes that followed her every move, especially his. Alexio sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding the room even in silence. The crystal chandelier cast warm light across the massive mahogany table, illuminating the faces of Alexio's most trusted men. They were all dangerous in their own right, but none held the raw power that emanated from their boss. Isabella kept her eyes down as she served each man, moving with practiced efficiency. "The wine, Isabella." Alexio's voice cut through the quiet murmur of conversation. She fought to keep her hands steady as she approached him with the bottle of aged Bordeaux. As she leaned in to pour, she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His cologne, rich and masculine, filled her senses. The wine flowed smoothly into his glass, the deep red liquid catching the light. When she finished, his hand brushed against hers as he reached for the glass. The touch, though brief, sent electricity through her veins. The men discussed business in low tones, their Italian mixing with English. Isabella tried not to listen as she moved around the table, refreshing drinks and clearing plates. She knew too much already, had seen too much. But Alexio's voice kept drawing her attention, his deep timbre impossible to ignore. "Your new shipment arrived safely?" one of the men asked, his thick gold rings catching the light as he gestured. "Without incident," Alexio replied, his tone casual but carrying an edge of warning. The topic was clearly not for discussion in front of the help. Isabella brought out the main course, perfectly seared steaks with roasted vegetables. The chef had outdone himself tonight, but she doubted anyone at the table truly appreciated the artistry of the meal. These men were more concerned with power plays and territory than fine dining. As she set Alexio's plate before him, she felt his gaze travel slowly up her body. Heat bloomed in her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. She was just a maid, invisible unless needed. At least that's what she kept telling herself. The dinner continued, course after course. Isabella moved like a shadow around the table, anticipating needs before they arose. It was exhausting, this dance of service and avoidance. But every time she passed Alexio, she felt the pull of his attention, like a physical touch against her skin. The men grew louder as the wine flowed freely, their laughter echoing off the wood-paneled walls. But Alexio remained controlled, watching everything with those dark, calculating eyes. He barely touched his wine, preferring to maintain his edge even among friends, if he could call them that. When dessert was finished, the men began to leave one by one, each nodding respectfully to Alexio as they departed. Isabella started clearing the table, gathering empty glasses and plates onto her serving tray. The dining room grew quieter with each departure, until only Alexio remained, still seated at the head of the table. She could feel him watching her as she worked, his silence more unnerving than any words could be. The clink of china and silver seemed too loud in the empty room. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she approached his place-setting, reaching for his barely touched dessert plate. "Come here." His command froze her in place. She turned slowly, finding herself alone with him for the first time since that night in the alley. His dark eyes captured hers, holding her in place as effectively as any physical restraint. The tension between them crackled like lightning before a storm, dangerous and electric. The crystal vase shattered against the marble floor, sending water and roses scattering across the foyer. Isabella froze, her hands still raised from where she'd been arranging the flowers. The sound of breaking glass was immediately drowned out by shouts and the thundering of footsteps. Men in dark clothes burst through the front door, their faces twisted with determination. Isabella's heart stopped as she recognized the tattoos on their necks, members of the Russo family, Alexio's biggest rivals in the city. "Where is he?" one of them demanded, grabbing Isabella's arm. His fingers dug into her flesh, making her wince. Before she could respond, a single gunshot cracked through the air. The man holding her jerked backward, blood blooming across his chest. He crumpled to the floor, taking Isabella down with him. She scrambled away from the body, her uniform stained with crimson. Alexio stood at the top of the grand staircase, his presence commanding even from a distance. His usual tailored suit was impeccable, but his eyes burned with a fury she'd never seen before. The gun in his hand looked like an extension of his arm, natural and deadly. "You dare enter my home?" His voice carried through the foyer, cold as ice. The intruders turned their attention to him, weapons raised. What happened next was a blur of violence and precision. Alexio moved like a predator, each shot finding its mark. His men emerged from the shadows, surrounding the intruders. The marble floor turned slick with blood as bodies fell. Isabella pressed herself against the wall, unable to look away. This was Alexio's true nature. Not the controlled businessman who watched her from afar, but a killer who ruled through force and fear. She watched him break a man's arm with clinical efficiency, the crack of bone punctuated by a scream. "Boss, there's more outside," one of his men called. Alexio's response was immediate. "Lock down the mansion, no one leaves alive." His gaze found Isabella, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes. Concern, perhaps? But it was gone in an instant, replaced by cold determination. The fight spilled into the garden. Isabella could hear gunshots and shouts through the open doors. Alexio moved with lethal grace, each action calculated and brutal. He snapped one man's neck with a single twist, shot another between the eyes without hesitation. The violence should have repulsed her. She should have run, hidden, closed her eyes. Instead, she found herself mesmerized by his deadly dance. There was something beautiful in his efficiency, something almost protective in the way he positioned himself between her and the danger. When it was over, the silence felt deafening. Bodies littered the once pristine foyer and garden. Alexio's men moved quickly, already beginning the cleanup. But Alexio himself stood still, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He turned to face Isabella, his gun still warm in his hand. Blood spattered his white shirt, but none of it was his own. His eyes, usually so hard and calculating, softened almost imperceptibly as they met hers. "You're safe," he said, his voice low and intense. The words carried more weight than a simple statement. They were a promise, written in blood and sealed with violence. Isabella stood trembling, her back still pressed against the wall. The man who had protected her and the man who had just killed without mercy were one and the same. She didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. Perhaps both. The mansion's atmosphere had shifted since the attack. Guards patrolled more frequently, their weapons visible and ready. Isabella noticed extra security cameras being installed, catching every movement in the sprawling estate. But the biggest change was in how Alexio treated her. "You'll work in my office today," he announced one morning, his tone leaving no room for argument. Isabella's hands trembled as she followed him up the grand staircase, past the spot where he'd gunned down the first intruder just days ago. His office was a testament to power and wealth. Dark wooden panels lined the walls, and a massive desk dominated the space. Afternoon sunlight streamed through bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. "File these," he commanded, gesturing to a stack of folders. "They need to be organized by date and family name." Isabella settled into the leather chair across from his desk, aware of his eyes following her every movement. The files contained names she recognized from newspaper headlines, prominent families, all with connections to the underworld. As she worked, Alexio made phone calls in Italian, his voice alternating between silk and steel. She caught words like vendetta and familia, understanding enough to know he was planning retaliation against the Russos. His hand brushed against hers when she passed him documents to sign. Each touch, though brief, sent electricity through her skin. He seemed to find excuses to stand closer than necessary, his cologne, expensive and masculine, making her head spin. "Your Italian is improving," he noted during a quiet moment, making her jump. She hadn't realized he'd noticed her reactions to his phone conversations. I pick things up quickly," she managed, avoiding his intense gaze. "Perhaps I should teach you properly." His voice dropped lower, intimate. "Private lessons, just you and me." Heat crept up her neck. "That won't be necessary, sir." "Alexio," he corrected, reaching across the desk to lift her chin with his finger. "When we're alone, you call me Alexio." The touch lingered, his thumb brushing across her jawline. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She should pull away, maintain professional distance. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, just slightly. Days turned into a routine. Morning coffee delivered to his office, afternoons spent organizing his schedule, evenings running errands that grew increasingly personal. He sent her to pick up custom-tailored suits, had her taste test wine selections for his collection. During a particularly late evening, he insisted on driving her home himself. The sleek black Mercedes purred through empty streets, its interior smelling of leather and his cologne. "Your mother," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "How is her treatment progressing?" Isabella stiffened. They hadn't spoken about what he'd discovered that night. "The new medication seems to be helping." "Good." His hand moved from the gear shift to rest on the console between them, inches from her knee. "If you need anything—" "I don't," she cut in, perhaps too quickly. "We're managing." His laugh was dark, knowing. "Pride doesn't suit you, Isabella. Not with me." The car stopped at a red light, and he turned to face her fully. In the dim glow of street lamps, his features seemed carved from shadow. His hand found her knee, the touch burning through her uniform. "Let me help you," he murmured, fingers tracing small circles on her skin. "Let me take care of everything." Isabella's heart raced. The offer was tempting, so tempting. But she'd seen what his help meant, seen the violence he was capable of. The memory of bodies on marble, floors warred with the gentleness of his touch. The light turned green, but his hand stayed where it was, a weighted promise of protection and possession. Isabella found herself fighting the urge to cover his hand with her own, to give in to the dangerous attraction building between them. Blood dripped onto the Italian marble, each crimson drop a stark contrast against the white floor. Alexio stood in his office, his white shirt stained red, jaw clenched in pain. The meeting with Giovanni, his former lieutenant, had ended violently, a necessary reminder of what happened to traitors in his organization. Isabella froze in the doorway, the fresh towels she'd been carrying falling from her hands. "You're hurt," His dark eyes found hers, warning clear in them. "Leave." But she couldn't. The wound on his shoulder was bleeding freely, and his usually steady hands shook as he tried to remove his jacket. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. "Let me help you." I said leave. His voice was ice, but she noticed the slight tremor in it. "You're bleeding all over your expensive floor," she said softly, approaching him like one might a wounded animal. "At least let me clean and dress it properly." For a long moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. Isabella gathered the first aid supplies from his private bathroom, her heart pounding. When she returned, he'd managed to remove his jacket and shirt, revealing the full extent of the damage. A deep gash ran across his right shoulder, but it wasn't the wound that caught her attention. It was the map of scars that covered his torso, each one telling its own story of violence and survival. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to his leather chair. To her surprise, he complied without argument. As she cleaned the wound, she could feel the tension in his muscles, the way he held himself rigid under her touch. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. "You're good at this," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual. "Practice," she replied, focusing on her task. "My mother, there were complications after her surgeries. I learned how to change dressings, clean wounds." His hand caught her wrist as she reached for the antiseptic. "You shouldn't have to carry such burdens." "We all carry burdens," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "Some are just more visible than others." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore so well. His grip on her wrist loosened but didn't release, his thumb brushing over her pulse point. "My father," he began, his voice low and controlled, "taught me that family was everything. Blood bonds were sacred." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Then he tried to have me killed when I was 19. Isabella's hands stilled on his shoulder. She'd heard rumors about the Vetro family's bloody history, but never from him directly. "My own uncle held the gun to my head," Alexio continued, his eyes distant. "They thought I was too soft to lead, too weak to make the hard choices." His jaw tightened. They were wrong. Isabella resumed cleaning his wound, but her touch was gentler now. She could feel his eyes on her face, watching her reaction. "Everything I've built," he said, "I built alone. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. Mercy is weakness. Love—" He trailed off, his hand moving from her wrist to cup her face. "Love is the most dangerous weakness of all." His thumb traced her cheekbone, and Isabella found herself leaning into his touch despite herself. In this moment, with his defenses lowered, she saw past the ruthless Mafia boss to the man beneath. Scarred, lonely, carrying the weight of an empire built on betrayal and blood. "Not all love ends in betrayal," she whispered, her fingers ghosting over an old scar near his heart. His eyes darkened at her touch. "No." The word was barely audible. "Prove it." The air between them crackled with tension, with possibility. Isabella could feel the rapid beat of his heart under her palm, matching her own racing pulse. For the first time, she saw Alexio Vetro as he truly was, not just the monster everyone feared, but a man shaped by pain and betrayal, capable of both terrible violence and surprising tenderness. Isabella couldn't sleep that night. The image of Alexio's scars haunted her, not just the physical ones that mapped his skin, but the deeper wounds he'd revealed. His confession about his family's betrayal played over in her mind, making her question everything she thought she knew about him. The next morning, she went about her duties with distracted precision. Every corner of the mansion held his presence, from the expensive artwork to the armed guards stationed at strategic points. This was his world, beautiful and dangerous, just like him. As she dusted the library shelves, her fingers traced the leather-bound spines. These books, she realized, were probably more for show than reading. Everything in Alexio's world was about power and appearance. "You seem troubled." His voice made her jump. She turned to find him watching her from the doorway, his shoulder now properly bandaged beneath his crisp black shirt. The vulnerability from last night was gone, replaced by his usual controlled demeanor. "I'm fine," she said automatically, turning back to her work. "You're lying." He moved closer, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "I can always tell when you lie, Isabella. Your left hand twitches slightly." She stilled her traitorous hand, heart racing. "I should finish my duties." "Look at me." The command in his voice made her spine stiffen. She turned slowly, forcing herself to meet his intense gaze. He stood too close now, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "You've been avoiding me since last night." "I haven't." "What did I say about lying?" His voice dropped lower, sending shivers down her spine. He reached out, brushing a bay strand of hair from her face. The gentle touch contrasted sharply with the dangerous glint in his eyes. Isabella took a step back, bumping into the bookshelf. "This isn't appropriate." "Appropriate?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Nothing about this situation is appropriate, Kara. You, working as a maid in my house, pretending you don't feel what's between us." "There's nothing between us," she insisted, even as her body betrayed her with a slight tremor. His hand slammed against the bookshelf beside her head, making her flinch. More lies. His face was inches from hers now. "You think I don't see how you watch me? How you shiver when I'm near?" "That's fear," she whispered. "No." His other hand came up to cup her face, surprisingly gentle. "Fear looks different on you. I've seen it, when those men attacked the mansion when you thought your mother's condition was worsening. This—" His thumb traced her lower lip. "This is something else entirely." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. He was right, and they both knew it. The pull between them wasn't just fear or attraction. It was something more dangerous, more consuming. "I can't," she started. "Can't what?" His voice was silky smooth now, seductive. "Can't admit that you're drawn to me? That despite knowing exactly who and what I am, you still want me? You're my employer." She tried one last time to maintain the professional boundary between them. He laughed again, dark and rich. "I'm much more than that, and you know it. From the moment I saw you, you were mine. Every attempt you make to maintain this pretense of distance only draws you deeper into my world." She should have been frightened by his possessiveness, should have been repulsed by his presumption. Instead, she felt that familiar pull, that dangerous attraction that had been growing stronger with each passing day. "I need to leave," she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. His grip tightened slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to assert control. "You'll never leave me. I won't let you." The words weren't just a threat. They carried the weight of a vow, a dark promise that sent equal parts thrill and terror through her body. Isabella jerked away from Alexio's grip, putting distance between them. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she tried to steady herself. The library suddenly felt too small, too intimate. "You can't control my entire life," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "I have responsibilities outside these walls." Alexio's jaw tightened, his dark eyes following her movement. "Your only responsibility is here now. To me." "That's not how the world works." She straightened her uniform, a nervous habit. I have family, obligations. I'm well aware of your family situation, he cut in, his voice sharp. Your mother's medical bills, the treatments she needs. I can handle all of that. Heat rushed to Isabella's face. I don't want your money. Pride? He scoffed, taking a step toward her. Or is it that you can't bear to be indebted to someone like me? Someone like you? The words burst from her before she could stop them. A man who solves everything with violence and control? Who thinks he can own people? His expression darkened. I protect what's mine. I'm not yours, the words echoed off the library walls. I'm not some possession you can add to your collection. I'm a person, with my own life, my own choices. Alexio moved with predatory grace, backing her against his desk. Your choices? His laugh was cold. Let's talk about choices, Isabella. You choose to work yourself to exhaustion, taking extra shifts, running yourself ragged. You choose to live in that dangerous neighborhood, risking your safety every night. Because I have to. She pushed against his chest, but he didn't budge. Not everyone has the luxury of living in a mansion with armed guards. His hands gripped the desk on either side of her, caging her in. And I'm offering you that luxury, protection, security, everything you need. At what cost? She tilted her chin up defiantly. My freedom, my dignity, your freedom. He leaned closer, his breath fanning across her face. You've never been free, Isabella. You've been a prisoner to poverty, to responsibility, to your family's needs. At least in my prison, you'd be safe, protected, cared for. Tears pricked at her eyes. That's not care, that's possession. Is there a difference? His voice dropped lower, more intimate. I would give you everything. Anything you want, anything you need. Your mother would have the best medical care. Your family would never want for anything again. And in return, I become your property? The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Another asset in your empire? His hand caught her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. You would be so much more than that. I don't want to be anything to you. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. The intensity in his eyes, the heat of his body so close to hers, it all affected her in ways she couldn't deny. More lies, he growled. You think I can't see how you respond to me? How your breath catches when I'm near? How your pulse races? His thumb brushed over her throat, feeling her racing heartbeat. That's fear, she whispered, but her voice trembled. No. His face was inches from hers now. This is fear. He shifted, pressing her harder against the desk. This is power. His other hand tangled in her hair. But this... His eyes dropped to her lips. This is something else entirely. Before she could protest, before she could gather her thoughts, his mouth crashed down on hers. The kiss was brutal, possessive, filled with all the anger and frustration of their argument. Isabella's hands came up to push him away, but somehow ended up clutching his shirt instead. She tried to resist, to maintain some semblance of control, but the force of his desire overwhelmed her. His tongue swept into her mouth, claiming, demanding, and she found herself responding with equal fervor. The world narrowed to just this, his hands in her hair, his body pressing her into the desk, the taste of him drowning out all reason. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. Isabella's lips tingled, her body humming with an energy she couldn't explain. She stared at him, seeing the same confusion and desire reflected in his dark eyes. Isabella's hands trembled as she closed her bedroom door. The taste of him lingered on her lips, a reminder she couldn't shake. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, still feeling the ghost of his kiss, the intensity that had consumed them both. The small room felt suffocating. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The neatly made bed, her few possessions arranged carefully on the dresser, the worn photo of her mother on the nightstand. But nothing felt the same. She was different now. Moving to the window, Isabella stared out at the manicured gardens below. The mansion's grounds stretched endlessly, beautiful and pristine, like a gilded cage. How many times had she watched the sunset from this window, dreaming of escape? Now, the thought of leaving made her chest ache. She caught her reflection in the glass, flushed cheeks, swollen lips, hair mussed from his fingers. The woman staring back at her looked wild, uncertain, lost. This wasn't who she was supposed to be. She was supposed to be strong, independent, focused on her family's needs, not caught up in dangerous games with a man who dealt in violence and control. Pushing away from the window, Isabella paced the room. Her uniform felt too tight, too constraining. She wanted to tear it off, to wash away the feeling of his hands on her body. But even that wouldn't help. The problem wasn't external. It was inside her, this growing need she couldn't control. "What am I doing?" she whispered to the empty room. Her mother's face smiled at her from the photograph, offering no answers. What would she think if she knew? If she could see her daughter now, trapped between desire and duty, between right and wrong. The memory of his words echoed in her mind. He could help her mother, give her the care she desperately needed. One word from him, and all their financial struggles would vanish. But the price, her freedom, her independence, everything she'd fought so hard to maintain. Isabella sank onto the bed, her head in her hands. The sheets still smelled faintly of lavender from when she'd washed them that morning. Such a normal, mundane task. How had her life spiraled so far from normal? She thought of his eyes, dark with possession, the way he'd claimed her mouth like he owned her. The scariest part wasn't his intensity. It was how much she'd wanted it, how right it had felt, even as every rational thought screamed at her to run. The room grew darker as the sun set, shadows stretching across the floor. Isabella didn't move to turn on the lights. The darkness felt appropriate, matching the turmoil in her heart. She should be planning her escape, finding a way out before she was in too deep. But she knew it was already too late. A creak in the hallway made her freeze. Heavy footsteps approached her door, footsteps she'd learned to recognize. Her heart thundered in her chest as they stopped outside her room. The handle turned slowly, deliberately. Alexio filled the doorway, his massive frame blocking the light from the hall. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence alone changed the air in the room, making it thick with tension and unspoken promises. Isabella stood, instinct telling her to maintain distance, but her legs felt weak. She watched as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Each movement was controlled, predatory. The soft click of the latch felt like a death sentence, or perhaps salvation. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. The distance between them shrank with each step, the air growing heavier, more charged. Isabella's back hit the wall, but still he advanced. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide from this thing between them. The moonlight streaming through the window cast half his face in shadow, making him look more dangerous than ever. But it wasn't fear that made Isabella's breath catch in her throat. It was anticipation, pure and undeniable, as he stepped into her personal space. They stood there, inches apart, the silence stretching between them like a living thing. Every breath felt significant, every tiny movement charged with meaning. The point of no return had arrived, and they both knew it. Isabella's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of Alexio's mahogany desk. The office around her breathed luxury. Italian leather chairs, crystal decanters filled with amber liquid, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city below. But right now, all she could focus on was the dangerous man before her. "I need to know," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "If I'm trapped in this world with you, I deserve to know what I'm dealing with." Alexio's dark eyes studied her, his expression unreadable. He moved with calculated grace, circling around the desk until he stood beside her. "Careful, Bella. Some questions are better left unasked." "No more games," Isabella insisted, turning to face him. "No more half-truths. I've seen enough to know this isn't just about business. The blood on your hands, the fear in people's eyes when they see you. I need to understand." A muscle ticked in his jaw. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then he reached past her, his arm brushing hers as he opened a drawer. The proximity made her breath catch, but she held her ground. "Very well," he said, pulling out a leather folder. "You want to know my world? Here it is." He spread photographs across the desk. Crime scene photos, surveillance shots, documents covered in numbers that made her head spin. Each image told a story of violence, power, and control. "My empire wasn't built on kindness," Alexio said, his voice low and dangerous. "Every piece of it was taken by force, protected by blood. The people who work for me, they're loyal because they know the price of betrayal." Isabella's fingers hovered over a photo of a burning warehouse. "The fire last month? That was you?" A warning to those who thought they could steal from me. His hand covered hers, pressing it flat against the image. "This is what happens to people who cross me, Isabella. I don't show mercy." The heat of his touch sent shivers down her spine, but she couldn't pull away. "And the charity foundation? The one that keeps getting anonymous donations?" A dark smile curved his lips. "Money needs to be cleaned before it can be spent. Some of it goes to good causes, hospitals, schools, research. It keeps the authorities looking the other way." "How many?" she whispered. "How many people have you killed?" He finished the question she couldn't. "I stopped counting years ago. In this business, death is currency. Respect is earned through fear." Isabella's heart raced as he stepped closer, caging her against the desk. His presence was overwhelming, a mix of danger and raw power that made her dizzy. "My father built this empire on old values," he continued. "Honor, family, tradition. But he was weak. When our enemies came for us, his principles got him killed. I learned from his mistakes. Now, no one dares move against me." "Is that why you keep me here?" Isabella asked. "To show your power?" Alexio's hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You're here because you fascinate me. Because in a world of snakes and liars, you shine with truth. Your compassion, your strength. They're dangerous qualities in my world. Yet I can't let you go." The confession hung heavy in the air between them. Isabella looked at the evidence of his crimes spread across the desk, then back at him. She should be terrified. She should be running. Instead, she found herself drawn to the raw power he emanated, the absolute control he commanded. "Show me more," she said softly. His eyes darkened with approval. One by one, he revealed his secrets, the network of informants, the corrupt officials on his payroll, the international connections that made him untouchable. Each revelation should have horrified her, but instead she felt a strange thrill. This was real power, the kind that shaped cities and bent laws to its will. As Alexio spoke, his voice grew more passionate, more intense. He wasn't just showing her his empire, he was offering her a place within it. The realization should have frightened her, but instead, it awakened something deep inside her. a hunger she never knew she possessed. Days melted into one another at the mansion, each one bringing subtle shifts in the delicate dance between Isabella and Alexio. The morning sun would find her arranging fresh flowers in his study, while he pretended to read reports at his desk. His dark eyes would follow her movements, drinking in every graceful gesture. "The white roses are particularly beautiful today," she commented one morning, adjusting a bloom in the crystal vase. Alexio set down his papers. "I had them brought in specially. I noticed you admire them." The simple observation made her pause. It was these moments that confused her most, his attention to the smallest details about her, the way he could be both predator and protector in the same breath. During their shared meals, which had become more frequent, Isabella found herself opening up about her mother's illness, her childhood struggles. Alexio listened with an intensity that made her feel both seen and exposed. "My mother always said that strength comes in many forms," she told him over dinner one evening. "Sometimes it's in standing up to people, sometimes it's in taking care of them." "And which are you doing with me?" he asked, his voice soft but loaded with meaning. She met his gaze. "I'm still trying to figure that out." Their conversations grew longer, deeper. He shared stories of his rise to power, carefully edited but honest enough to make her understand the weight he carried. She learned to read the tension in his shoulders, to recognize when the business of his empire wore heavily on him. One afternoon, she found him in the library, staring out the window with a glass of whiskey in hand. Without a word, she approached and stood beside him. The silence between them felt comfortable, almost intimate. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The path you've chosen?" He turned to face her, his expression unguarded for once. "Regret is a luxury I can't afford, Isabella. Every choice I've made has led me here." His fingers brushed against hers. "To you." The touch sent electricity through her veins, but before she could respond, his phone buzzed. The mask of the ruthless boss slipped back into place as he answered it, barking orders in Italian. These peaceful moments were always interrupted by reality. A gunshot in the distance, hushed conversations between his men, the constant rotation of armed guards around the property. Isabella couldn't forget what he was, what he did. Yet she found herself drawn to him more with each passing day. One evening, she discovered him in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee. The sight of the powerful Mafia boss struggling with the expensive machine made her laugh. "Let me," she offered, stepping closer. Her hands guided his through the motions, showing him how to operate it properly. The warmth of his body behind her, the strength in his hands beneath hers, it felt dangerous and right at the same time. "You make everything look so simple," he murmured against her ear. "Maybe you just need to learn to let someone help you sometimes." His grip tightened momentarily on her hands. "I don't trust easily, Isabella. But with you..." The confession hung unfinished between them. Before he could continue, his security chief burst into the kitchen, face grim. "Boss, we have a situation." The moment shattered. Isabella stepped away, watching as Alexio transformed back into the cold, calculating leader she first met. But now she knew what lay beneath that exterior. She'd felt the warmth of his touch, seen the vulnerability in his eyes. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a message. The unknown number made her pause, but nothing could have prepared her for the words that appeared on her screen. "His weakness will be his downfall, and you, pretty maid, are that weakness." Her hands shook as she stared at the threat, the peace of the past days evaporating like morning mist. This was the reality of his world, violence lurking beneath every quiet moment, danger shadowing every tender touch. Alexio found her minutes later, her face pale as she showed him the message. His expression darkened with fury, but when he reached for her, his touch was gentle. "No one will hurt you," he promised, his voice steel and silk. "I'll burn this city to the ground before I let anyone touch you." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they made her feel both protected and terrified, not of him, but of the depth of her feelings for a man whose love came wrapped in violence and danger. Isabella smoothed down her black cocktail dress, a garment Alexio had specifically chosen for tonight's meeting. The silk felt foreign against her skin, so different from her usual maid's uniform. Her reflection in the mirror showed someone she barely recognized. Elegant, polished, dangerous by association. "Remember," Alexio's voice came from behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "Stay close to me. Don't speak unless spoken to. These men—" He paused, his grip tightening slightly. "They're not like my usual associates." The Grande Hotel's private dining room buzzed with quiet tension. 5 men sat around the mahogany table, each flanked by their own security. Isabella noticed how their eyes flickered to her as Alexio guided her to their seats, his hand possessive at the small of her back. "Vetro." A man with silver-streaked hair nodded. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd join us." His Italian accent was thick, his smile never reaching his eyes. This was Marco Rossi, old money from Sicily, and Isabella could feel his calculating gaze assessing her worth as leverage. "Traffic," Alexio replied smoothly, pulling out Isabella's chair before taking his own. "Shall we begin?" The meeting started with pleasantries, expensive wine poured, cigars lit, casual conversation about mutual acquaintances. But Isabella wasn't fooled. She could see the tension in Alexio's jaw, the way his fingers occasionally brushed against the gun she knew was hidden beneath his jacket. A waiter appeared with the first course, and Isabella noticed how Alexio waited for others to take their first bites before touching his own. Food. Even here, in this luxurious setting, death lurked in the shadows. "About the shipping routes," Marco began, setting down his fork. "Your recent expansion has caused some concern among the families." Isabella felt the atmosphere shift. Alexio's expression remained neutral, but she saw his knuckles whiten around his wine glass. "The routes were fair game after the Colombos lost their hold." "Fair game?" Another man scoffed, younger, with a nasty scar across his throat. "You moved in before their bodies were cold." "Business waits for no one." Alexio's voice carried a warning edge. "Or have you forgotten how your own father gained his territory, Giuseppe?" Isabella's heart pounded as the tension mounted. She kept her eyes down, focused on the untouched food before her. Under the table, Alexio's hand found her knee, squeezing gently, a reminder of his presence, his protection. The conversation circled like sharks around blood, each man probing for weakness. Isabella watched in horrified fascination as millions of dollars in illegal goods were discussed as casually as weather. Lives were bargained away between sips of $1,000 wine. "And what about your new companion?" Marco's eyes settled on Isabella, making her skin crawl. "Quite a change from your usual type, Vetro. She seems innocent." Alexio's hand tightened on her knee. "She's not up for discussion." "Everything is up for discussion tonight," Giuseppe interjected, leaning forward. "Your territory expansion, your new alliances, your weaknesses." "Careful." Alexio's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. The tension crackled like electricity. Isabella noticed subtle movements around the room, hands sliding beneath jackets, security guards shifting their stances. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet somehow protected by the barely contained violence radiating from Alexio. "We've been patient," Marco said, setting down his wine glass with deliberate care. But patience has its limits. The families have concerns about your growing influence, about the balance of power. The balance of power, Alexio repeated slowly, is exactly as it should be. His thumb traced circles on Isabella's knee, but his voice carried steel. Unless someone wishes to challenge it? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Isabella held her breath, watching as the men around the table exchanged glances. She could feel the precipice they stood on. One wrong word, one sudden move, and the carefully maintained facade of civility would shatter. Giuseppe's hand moved too quickly toward his jacket. In an instant, the room erupted into chaos. The gunshot echoed through the Grande Hotel's dining room before anyone could react. Isabella's wine glass shattered, red liquid spilling across the pristine tablecloth like blood. She barely had time to process what was happening before Alexio yanked her to the ground, shielding her body with his own, as chaos erupted around them. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice ice-cold as he drew his weapon. The room filled with the deafening sound of gunfire and breaking glass. Through the mayhem, Isabella caught glimpses of the betrayal unfolding. Marco's men weren't shooting at Alexio. They were targeting Giuseppe's crew. And among the firefight, she spotted Antonio, Alexio's most trusted lieutenant, slipping something to Marco before disappearing through a service door. Alexio saw it too, his entire body tensed, a low growl escaping his throat. The betrayal was written all over his face, shock quickly morphing into murderous rage. "Move," he commanded, guiding Isabella behind an overturned table. His men had formed a protective circle around them, returning fire while creating an escape route. "When I say run, you run. Don't look back." Isabella's heart thundered in her chest. The elegant dress Alexio had chosen for her was ruined, torn and stained as they crawled across broken glass and spilled wine. She could smell gunpowder and blood, hear the screams and chaos around them. "Now!" Alexio's voice cut through the madness. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the kitchen exit. They burst through the doors, past terrified staff members huddling behind counters. Isabella's heels clattered against the tile floor as they ran, Alexio's grip on her arm unwavering. Behind them, the gunfire continued, punctuated by shouts and breaking glass. They emerged into the back alley where Alexio's car waited. But before they could reach it, a shot rang out. Isabella felt Alexio jerk beside her, his grip tightening painfully on her arm. She turned to see blood blooming across his shoulder. Antonio stood at the other end of the alley, gun raised. "Nothing personal, boss," he called out, his voice eerily calm. "Just business. Marco made a better offer." Alexio's face transformed into something Isabella had never seen before. Pure, unrestrained fury. In one fluid motion, he pushed her behind him and fired. Antonio dropped, a look of surprise frozen on his face. "Get in the car," Alexio ordered, his voice deadly quiet. When Isabella hesitated, he barked, "Now!" She scrambled into the passenger seat as Alexio slid behind the wheel, his wounded shoulder leaving a smear of blood on the leather. The engine roared to life just as more of Marco's men appeared in the alley, bullets pinging off the armored exterior. As they tore through the city streets, Isabella could see the storm brewing in Alexio's eyes. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Blood continued to seep from his shoulder, but he seemed oblivious to the pain. "They'll pay," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Every single one of them will pay." Isabella shrank back in her seat, truly afraid for the first time. Not of the men who had tried to kill them, but of the darkness she saw consuming Alexio. This was a side of him she'd glimpsed before, but never fully witnessed. The ruthless Mafia boss, who had built his empire on blood and fear. "Alexio," she whispered, reaching for him. He jerked away from her touch, his eyes wild. "Don't," he growled. "They tried to kill you. They tried to take you from me." His voice cracked with barely contained rage. "I'll burn everything they love to the ground." Isabella felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she watched the man she'd grown to care for disappear behind a mask of vengeance and fury. The tenderness she'd discovered beneath his hard exterior was gone, replaced by something terrifying and brutal. The safe house felt like a prison. Isabella paced the length of the bedroom, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Outside, armed guards patrolled the perimeter. For her protection, Alexio had said. But she knew better. They were there to keep her from leaving as much as to keep others from getting in. 3 days had passed since the shooting at the Grande Hotel. 3 days of being locked away while Alexio waged his war of vengeance. She'd barely seen him, catching only glimpses as he came and went, his face harder and more distant each time. The door opened without warning. Alexio stood in the threshold, his presence filling the room. The wound in his shoulder had been treated, but Isabella could see the stiffness in his movements. His eyes were dark with exhaustion and something else. Determination. "Pack your things," he ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. "You're leaving in an hour." Isabella froze. "Leaving? Where?" "Somewhere safe, far from here." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "A plane is waiting." "You're sending me away?" The words came out as a whisper. Despite everything, despite the danger and violence, the thought of leaving him made her chest ache. "It's not safe for you here anymore." His jaw clenched. "Marco's men are everywhere. The betrayal runs deeper than we thought. Until I clean house, you need to disappear." "And what about you?" She stepped closer, searching his face for any sign of the tenderness they'd shared. "What happens to you while I'm gone?" Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or regret. But it vanished quickly behind his mask of control. "I do what needs to be done." 2 of his men appeared in the doorway, carrying her bags. They'd already packed for her, she realized. This wasn't a discussion. It was an order. "Please," she tried one last time. "Don't do this. Don't push me away." Alexio's hands clenched at his sides. For a moment she thought he might reach for her, might pull her into his arms like he had so many times before. Instead, he turned away. "The car is waiting." The drive to the private airfield passed in tense silence. Isabella sat beside Alexio in the back of the armored SUV, acutely aware of the space between them. His body was rigid, focused straight ahead, but she could feel the turmoil radiating from him. They pulled up to a sleek private jet, its engines already humming. More of Alexio's men stood guard, their weapons visible beneath their suits. This was really happening. He was really sending her away. "How long?" she asked as they walked toward the plane. "As long as it takes." His voice was clipped, professional. "Someone will contact you when it's safe." "And if it's never safe?" He stopped walking, finally turning to face her. The mask cracked, just for a moment, and she saw the agony beneath. "I won't let them hurt you," he said roughly. "I can't lose you." "But you're losing me now," she whispered. "By sending me away, you're giving them exactly what they want." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Better lost than dead." The words seemed to cost him physically. "I've made too many enemies, Isabella. I've put too many targets on my back, and now they know. They know what you mean to me. Then let me stay and face them with you." "No." His voice turned hard again. "Get on the plane." She looked up at the man who had consumed her world, who had shown her both tenderness and terror. The man she'd grown to love despite everything. His walls were back up, higher than ever, but she could see the cracks. The plane's engines grew louder, an insistent reminder that time was running out. Isabella took one step backward, then another, his hand falling away from her face. Each step felt like a betrayal, to him and to herself. At the base of the stairs, she paused, looking back at Alexio. He stood like a statue, power and pain radiating from his rigid posture. She wanted to run back to him, to refuse this separation. But the memory of gunfire and blood held her back. The fear of what he might become in his quest for vengeance made her turn away. Blood dripped from Alexio's knuckles as he stared down at the man tied to the chair. Marco's right-hand man, Antonio, had finally broken after hours of interrogation. His face was barely recognizable, swollen and bruised from Alexio's methodical work. "Tell me again," Alexio's voice cut through the dim warehouse like a blade. "Who gave the order?" Antonio spat blood onto the concrete floor. "Marco. It was Marco. He's been planning this for months. Said you'd gone soft because of the girl." Alexio's control snapped. He grabbed Antonio's throat, squeezing until the man's eyes bulged. "Her name is Isabella," he growled, "and because of your betrayal, she's gone." The past week had been hell. Every night he'd lie awake in his empty mansion, haunted by the memory of Isabella's face as she boarded that plane. The distance between them was a physical ache, a constant reminder of his failure to protect what was his. "Marco's got men everywhere," Antonio wheezed, when Alexio loosened his grip. "In your security team, your business partners. He's been turning them against you, one by one." Alexio's mind raced through the implications. The attack at the mansion, the threatening messages to Isabella. It had all been orchestrated from within. His own people, bought and turned by a man he'd once considered an ally. "Where is he?" Antonio hesitated, fear flickering across his battered face. "He'll kill me if—" Alexio didn't let him finish. His fist connected with Antonio's jaw, sending fresh blood spattering across the floor. "I'll kill you now if you don't tell me." "The old distillery," Antonio gasped. "On the east side. He's been running operations from there, planning your downfall." A cold smile spread across Alexio's face. The East Side Distillery. He knew it well. He'd started his empire there, years ago, before climbing his way to the top. How fitting that Marco would choose that place for his betrayal. "Thank you for your cooperation," Alexio said quietly, pulling out his gun. Antonio's eyes widened in terror. "Wait, I told you everything." The gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Alexio holstered his weapon, turning to face his remaining loyal men. "Clean this up, then gather everyone. We move on the distillery tonight." As his men worked, Alexio pulled out his phone, staring at the last photo he had of Isabella. She was working in the garden, unaware of his presence, sunlight catching her hair. The sight of her made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar ache. "Soon," he whispered to the image. "I'm coming for you." Hours later, Alexio stood outside the distillery, the night air thick with tension. His men moved silently into position, surrounding the building. Through his earpiece, he heard confirmations as each team reported ready. "On my mark," he ordered, checking his weapons one final time. "Take everyone alive if possible. Marco is mine." The assault was swift and brutal. Alexio led the charge through the main entrance, his gun barking in the darkness. Bodies fell before him as he carved his way deeper into the building, driven by a rage that had been building since Isabella's departure. Marco's men fought back, but they were outmatched. Alexio had brought his elite team, men who'd proven their loyalty through years of service. The sound of gunfire and screams filled the old distillery as room after room fell to their advance. Finally, Alexio reached the office on the top floor. Marco was waiting, a gun trained on the door. "I knew you'd come," Marco said, his voice steady despite the chaos below. The great Alexio Vetro, brought low by a simple maid. Alexio's finger tightened on the trigger. "You threatened what's mine." "She made you weak," Marco sneered. "The mighty Dawn, following a servant girl like a lovesick puppy. You're pathetic." The words hit too close to home. Alexio had questioned himself countless times, wondered if his feelings for Isabella had indeed made him vulnerable. But now, facing Marco's betrayal, he realized the truth. Isabella hadn't weakened him. She'd given him something worth fighting for. "No," Alexio said quietly. "She made me stronger." The night exploded in gunfire and screams. Isabella watched from her hotel window as black SUVs swarmed the streets below, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Her hands trembled as she recognized Alexio's men, their movements precise and deadly. She'd been hiding here for 3 days, trying to convince herself she could start a new life away from him. But Alexio's influence reached far, and now the city was paying the price for her attempted escape. Her phone buzzed. Another message from an unknown number. "Stay where you are. He's coming." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew this would happen. Alexio wasn't the type of man to let go of what he considered his. The past week had been a fantasy, thinking she could break free from his grip. Gunshots echoed closer. Through the window, she saw men in suits dragging others into cars, their movements efficient and brutal. This was Alexio's world, the one she'd tried so hard to avoid, now spilling onto the streets in a display of raw power. The hotel room door burst open. 2 of Alexio's guards entered, their weapons drawn. "Miss Romano," one said, "Mr. Vetro requests your presence." Isabella backed away, her spine hitting the cold window. "I won't go back." "You don't have a choice," the other guard stated flatly. "The city isn't safe tonight. Mr. Vetro is cleaning house." They escorted her through the hotel's emergency stairwell, past terrified guests huddling in corners. Outside, the night air was thick with tension. More gunfire erupted from somewhere nearby, making Isabella flinch. They led her to a waiting car, its engine running. Inside, the leather seats still held Alexio's familiar scent, expensive cologne and danger. The car moved through streets littered with evidence of violence, broken glass, abandoned vehicles, signs of struggle. They arrived at a warehouse by the docks. Isabella recognized it as one of Alexio's properties, a place she'd visited once before. The guards ushered her inside, through corridors that echoed with distant shouts and the occasional burst of gunfire. In a large office overlooking the water, Alexio stood at the window. His suit was immaculate, but his knuckles were bruised, speckled with blood. When he turned, his eyes locked onto Isabella with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Leave us," he commanded the guards. They disappeared without a word. "What are you doing, Alexio?" Isabella's voice shook despite her effort to stay calm. He moved closer, his presence filling the room. "What am I doing? I'm taking back what's mine. Every traitor, every threat to your safety. They're all being dealt with tonight." "I never asked for this," she whispered. "You didn't have to." His hand reached out, fingers brushing her cheek. "They threatened you. They made you run from me. That's unforgivable." An explosion rocked the building, making the windows rattle. Alexio didn't even flinch, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. "The city's burning because of me," she said, tears threatening to fall. "No," Alexio's voice was harsh. "It's burning because they dared to come between us, Because they thought they could use you to weaken me. His hand slid to her throat, not squeezing, just holding. They were wrong. You make me stronger, more dangerous, more determined. Isabella felt the heat of his touch, the possessive way his fingers pressed against her pulse. She should be terrified. This man was orchestrating a war outside these walls, but instead she felt that familiar pull, the dangerous attraction that had always existed between them. "You can't leave again," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I won't allow it. You're mine, Isabella, forever." Her heart raced, torn between fear and desire. This was the moment she should run, should fight against his control. But as another explosion lit up the night sky outside, she realized the truth. She belonged in this dangerous world with him. Her heart had made that choice long ago, even if her mind was still catching up. "Say it," he demanded, his grip tightening slightly. "Say you'll stay." The city burned around them, Alexio's revenge painting the night in chaos and violence. And Isabella stood in the eye of the storm, caught between the man she loved and the destruction he brought with him. The blood on Alexio's knuckles had dried to a rusty brown, his suit jacket torn at the shoulder. Isabella had never seen him so disheveled, so raw. He stood before her in the warehouse office, the chaos of the night still echoing through the building's metal walls. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice hoarse from shouting orders all night. When Isabella met his gaze, she saw something new there, vulnerability beneath the steel. His fingers, still trembling from adrenaline, reached for her face. "Do you understand what you've done to me?" The question came out rough, almost accusatory. "I've built an empire on control, on power. I've never needed anyone." Another explosion rocked the building, but neither of them flinched. The world outside could burn. This moment belonged to them. "But you," he continued, his thumb tracing her cheekbone, "you've destroyed everything I thought I knew. When you left..." His jaw clenched, the memory clearly painful. "I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I've killed men for less than what you did to me, running away like that." Isabella's heart thundered in her chest. She'd never seen him like this, stripped of his usual cold composure, raw emotion bleeding through every crack in his armor. "I thought I wanted to own you," he admitted, his hand sliding to cup the back of her neck. "To possess you, to keep you locked away where no one else could touch you." His grip tightened slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to remind her of his strength. "But it's more than that. So much more." He pulled her closer, until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne wrapped around her, dizzyingly familiar. "I love you," he growled, the words seeming to tear from his throat. "I love you with everything I am. All the darkness, all the violence, all the broken pieces. You make me want to be better, but you also accept the monster in me." His other hand fisted in her hair, desperate. "I can't lose you again. I won't survive it." Isabella's breath caught. She'd known he was obsessed, known he wanted to possess her. But this confession, this raw, unfiltered truth, was different. This was Alexio Vetro, the feared Mafia boss, laying his heart bare before her. "Every life I took tonight," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "Every drop of blood spilled. It was all for you, to keep you safe, to eliminate anyone who might try to take you from me again." His forehead pressed against hers, his breathing ragged. "I've never begged for anything in my life, Isabella, but I'm begging now. Stay with me, love me, let me protect you, cherish you, worship you the way you deserve." The violence of the night still raged outside, but in this moment Isabella felt an unexpected peace settle over her. She'd been fighting this, fighting him for so long, fighting the darkness he represented, the danger that came with loving him. But now, seeing him stripped bare before her, she realized something profound. The darkness wasn't something to fear. It was part of him, part of what made him the man who would tear apart a city to keep her safe. The man who could order deaths without blinking but touched her with such reverence. The man who had just handed her his heart, trusting her not to crush it. Her hands came up to frame his face, feeling the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor that betrayed his vulnerability. His eyes, those eyes that could freeze men in their tracks, watched her with a mixture of hope and fear that made her heart ache. In this warehouse, with the city burning around them and blood still drying on his knuckles, Isabella finally stopped running. She saw him, truly saw him, for everything he was, the monster and the man, the darkness and the light, the violence and the love, and she wasn't afraid anymore. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexio's penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Isabella stood at the window, watching the city come alive below. The chaos of the past weeks had settled, but evidence of the war still scarred the streets. Burned buildings, boarded windows, and the whispered stories of what had happened during those dark nights. Alexio's reflection appeared behind her in the glass. Even now, after everything, her heart skipped at his presence. He wore a crisp black suit, but his usual rigid posture was softer, more relaxed. His hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. "The Castelli family signed the peace agreement this morning," he said, his voice low and intimate. "The last of the holdouts." Isabella leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "And the others?" "They know their place now." His arms, wrapped around her waist, protective and possessive. "No one will dare challenge us again, not after what happened to those who tried." The memory of those violent nights still made her shudder. The gunfire, the screams, the way Alexio had torn through his enemies like an avenging angel. But she understood now. Every death, every drop of blood had been for their future, for the peace they could finally enjoy. "Your mother's new treatment is working well," he continued, changing the subject. "The doctors are optimistic." Tears pricked at Isabella's eyes. Even in the midst of war, Alexio had ensured her mother received the best care possible. It was these moments of tenderness, tucked between his displays of brutality, that had made her fall in love with him. She turned in his arms, studying his face. The cut above his eyebrow had healed to a thin silver line, a permanent reminder of the night he'd fought to bring her back. His eyes, usually hard as steel, softened as they met hers. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted, running her fingers along his jaw. "When I first came here, as just another maid in your mansion, I was so afraid of you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You should have been. I was obsessed with you from the moment I saw you, watching you, following you, wanting to possess you completely." His grip tightened slightly. "But you changed everything. You made me want to be more than just the monster everyone feared." The penthouse was quiet, a stark contrast to the violence that had consumed their lives. Sunlight played across the expensive furniture, the art pieces Alexio had collected, the fresh flowers Isabella insisted on keeping. It was their sanctuary now, a place where they could be themselves without the masks they wore for the outside world. "The nightmares are getting better," Isabella said softly. They both still had them, dreams of separation, of loss, of the brutal fights that had nearly torn them apart. But now they faced them together, finding comfort in each other's arms when the darkness threatened to overwhelm them. Alexio led her to the plush sofa, pulling her down beside him. His fingers traced patterns on her skin, a habit he'd developed during their quieter moments. "I've given orders for the renovation of the East Wing," he said. "The damage from the explosion will be repaired within the month." Isabella nodded, remembering the night the mansion had been attacked. She'd been terrified then, but now she felt only a sense of peace. This was her life now, the good and the bad, the violence and the tenderness, all of it bound together by their love. "The families respect you now," Alexio continued, pride evident in his voice. "They've seen your strength, your loyalty. They know that to challenge me is to face both of us." She smiled, thinking of how far they'd come. From maid and master to equals, their relationship forged in fire and blood. The power dynamics had shifted, evolved into something deeper, more balanced. She was no longer just the woman Alexio protected. She was his partner, his conscience, his heart. Alexio pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. In these quiet moments, the weight of his empire seemed to lift from his shoulders. Here, he wasn't the feared Mafia boss who had painted the city red with his enemy's blood. He was simply hers, as she was his. Isabella stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, watching the city lights flicker like stars below. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Behind her, she heard Alexio's measured footsteps approaching. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice carrying that particular softness he reserved only for her. His reflection appeared beside hers in the glass, tall and imposing in his tailored suit. "The future," she answered honestly, leaning back against his chest as his arms encircled her waist. "Our future." Alexio's chest rumbled with a low hum of acknowledgement. "Are you worried?" Isabella turned in his arms, studying the face she'd come to love despite all odds. The scar above his eyebrow had healed well, but it served as a constant reminder of everything they'd survived together. Not worried, exactly. Just aware. His dark eyes searched hers, understanding flowing between them. "The danger will never completely disappear," he admitted, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "It's the nature of this life. But you know I won't let anything happen to you." "I know." She covered his hand with hers, drawing strength from his touch. "It's not just about the danger, though. It's about everything we're building together. The clinic for my mother, the legitimate businesses, the peace treaties with the other families." Alexio led her to the plush sofa, pulling her down beside him. The leather was soft and warm beneath them, and Isabella curled into his side instinctively. "All of that is for us," he said, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "Everything I do now, I do with you in mind." "The other families are still adjusting," she pointed out. "Not everyone is happy with the changes you're making." A dangerous smile curved his lips. "Let them be unhappy. They know better than to challenge us now." His expression softened as he looked at her. "Besides, most of them respect you. They've seen how you've changed things. Changed me." Isabella thought about the transformation they'd both undergone. She was no longer the frightened maid, trying to secretly support her sick mother. And Alexio, while still dangerous and powerful, had found balance in his brutality. His love for her hadn't made him weak. It had given him something worth protecting. "I never thought I'd find peace in this world," she admitted, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted golden streaks across the floor. "I was so afraid of you at first, of what you represented." Alexio's arm tightened around her. "And now? Now I understand that life isn't black and white, that sometimes the most beautiful things can grow in the darkest places." She turned to face him fully. That love can exist even in a world of violence. His eyes darkened with emotion, and he pulled her closer. You changed everything, Isabella. Before you, I only knew how to rule through fear. I didn't understand that true loyalty comes from something deeper. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in thought. The city continued to buzz below them, but up here in their sanctuary, time seemed to slow down. The weight of their empire, the responsibilities, the constant vigilance, it all faded into the background when they were together like this. Whatever comes next, Alexio said finally, his voice carrying the weight of a vow. We'll face it together. I've built this empire with blood and violence, but with you, I'm building something that will last, something worth protecting. Isabella nodded, understanding the depth of his words. They both knew that danger would always lurk in the shadows of their world, but they'd found something rare and precious, a love that had survived betrayal, violence, and fear, a love worth fighting for. Alexio shifted, turning to face her fully. His eyes held that intensity that still made her breath catch, even after all this time. I promise you, Isabella, he said, his voice low and fierce with conviction. I will always protect you. No one will ever take you from me. Not now. Not ever. Isabella stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse suite, watching the city lights twinkle below. The empire they'd built together stretched out before her, a landscape of towering buildings and quiet power. Alexio's presence behind her was a constant comfort now, his reflection joining hers in the glass as he approached. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, casting long shadows across their domain. From this height, everything looked peaceful, but they both knew the delicate balance of power that maintained that peace. Their world was built on careful negotiations, strategic alliances, and yes, sometimes necessary violence. Look at what we've created together, Alexio murmured, his hands settling on her shoulders. His touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the ruthless power she knew he wielded in their world. Isabella leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. It's beautiful, she admitted, watching a sleek black car pull up to their building below. Different from what I imagined my life would be, but beautiful nonetheless. Alexio's chest rumbled with quiet laughter. When I first saw you, folding laundry in my mansion, I never imagined this either. His arms slid around her waist, pulling her closer. You were just supposed to be another employee, someone to keep my house in order. Instead, I turned your whole world upside down, she teased, though they both knew the truth in those words. You brought order to my chaos, he corrected, his lips brushing against her ear. You showed me there was more to power than fear and violence. Isabella turned in his arms, studying the face she'd come to love. The sharp angles of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes, the small scar above his eyebrow. All of it was familiar now, precious to her. And you showed me that sometimes the most dangerous path can lead to the greatest happiness. His expression softened, something that only happened when they were alone together. Are you happy, Isabella? Truly? She considered the question carefully, knowing he deserved her complete honesty. I am. It's not the life I dreamed of when I was younger, but it's become everything I need. She gestured to the city below. We're doing good things now. The medical clinic for my mother, the rehabilitation programs, the legitimate businesses. We're building something meaningful. Alexio's thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch reverent. You've changed everything. The other families respect us not just because they fear us, but because they see the strength in our unity. They see that there's more than one way to maintain power, Isabella agreed. She thought about the meetings they'd attended together, how the other bosses had initially sneered at Alexio's changes, but gradually come to respect their new approach. The last rays of sunlight caught the diamond on her finger, sending prisms of light dancing across the walls. Alexio's eyes followed the movement, his expression darkening with possession and pride. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous tone that still sent shivers down her spine. "When I first caught you sneaking out of the mansion, I thought you were betraying me." Isabella smiled at the memory. "And instead, you found out I was just trying to help my mother." "That was the moment everything changed," he admitted. "Seeing your strength, your determination to protect your family, it awakened something in me I thought had died long ago." She reached up, tracing the line of his jaw. "We protect each other now, and everyone under our protection." Alexio's arms tightened around her, his expression intense. "Yes, we do. And we always will." He pulled her closer, his powerful frame enveloping her completely. His lips brushed her ear as he whispered, "You're mine forever." The words sent a familiar thrill through her body. Their future might be uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers they couldn't yet see, but they would face it together. They had built something stronger than either of them could have achieved alone. A partnership forged in fire, tempered by love, and strengthened by shared purpose. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.